So why do adults need to embrace imagination for and creativity for personal growth? Why is that so important?
I love that you link this with kids because I think that's part of it. I think that imagination is often thought of as something that belongs to our childhoods and that we grow out of it. And I'm on a bit of a crusade to help adults grow into imagination rather than growing out of it. I think the importance comes from the fact that often, especially when we're going through transition.
Buckle up for a new episode of the Be S.H.E podcast, the show where we have real and raw conversations to inspire and empower you to be seen and heard so you can create balance and everything you want in your life and business. I'm your host, Heidi Schock, and I'm excited to walk alongside of you on this journey of being seen, heard, and empowered. Welcome to today's episode of the Be S.H.E podcast. Be seen, be heard, be empowered. And I'm excited about our conversation today because I am being joined by Dr. Rebecca Sutherns, and we're going to have an empowering conversation. Welcome, Dr. Rebecca, and thank you so much for joining me today.
I appreciate having me, Heidi. Hello.
Hi, and I'm so excited to have you here. Before we dive in, I'm just going to give everybody a brief introduction to kind of get to know you a little bit before we start our conversation. So Dr. Rebecca Sutherns is an author and midlife transition coach, helping high-achieving women navigate life's toughest transitions, whether due to career shifts, empty nests, or other personal challenges. She gives her clients clarity, energy, and confidence by aligning their values with their action. Using her elastic method, she helps women stretch into the next phase of life without snapping or snapping back. I am really intrigued with your elastic method, Dr. Rebecca. But before we talk about that, I'd really love to know more about your journey. And this is the question I ask all of my guests. And so my question for you is, how you help your clients now during midlife. Is this something that you navigated yourself in a journey that you've gone through and you've moved through the process yourself and now help others move through it with themselves? Or is this something that when you were young, you knew that you had a talent or you had a passion around this, learned what you needed to learn and now help people through it? Or was it a combination of possibly both?
Always a combination in some ways. I mean, this particular piece is something that have lived and am living through, yes, but also I feel like my career up to this point has equipped me for this work. So the main job that I do usually is I help organizations with strategy. I'm a strategy facilitator. I work in the nonprofit space in Canada and internationally, helping organizations and groups of organizations navigate where they want to go next. And so out of that came this idea of helping them reimagine their next chapter. And kind of organically, naturally, the leaders of those organizations, many of whom do find themselves around midlife, but maybe not. Many of the executive directors, the CEOs, the board chairs of those organizations that I've been working with for 25 years would come to me looking for one-on-one coaching. And so gradually over the last several years, the coaching piece of the work has evolved such that I can now help individuals reimagine their next chapter as well. And so it's been linked with the work, but also linked with my own journey because I'm at a stage of I'm in year 2 of all of our children being gone, but we lived through almost a decade of emptying nest. And so the transition of parenting full-time versus parenting in a different way has certainly been something that I needed to adjust to. And then also in more recent years, entering into the grandparent phase as well. So combination of family related and professional related circumstances have led me to this place, and I'm really enjoying it.
Well, I was just thinking about today because I was in the car with my daughter. She's 15 and she's in high school. And I was just thinking today about like one day she's only here for a few more years, depending on her journey herself. And then my son is 14. So I'm kind of trying to prepare myself for the empty nesting phase because she's starting to learn how to drive. And I already know the anxiety I'm feeling over that chapter. Like, oh my gosh, is she going to be safe and all of these? I can't imagine going through the empty nesting phase of them moving on to their own lives and going, oh my gosh, are they going to be safe? Do we prepare them enough? Are they prepared enough for that next chapter? So thank you so much for sharing that. And then I was talking to my daughter about, I don't know how it came up in the car, but when she has a child, how I'm like, just so you know, your child's going to be my child. And saying that with love, obviously it's not, but grandparents going to be such an exciting time. And you're in that right now.
We are. Yeah, we've got a
Uh,
granddaughter who's 5 and a grandson who's 2, and we're very grateful that we live walkable to them. So they're a big day-to-day part of our lives, which feels like a bonus.
yeah, that's so much fun. So can you tell me, like said, I was intrigued about your elastic method. Can you tell us what that is more and more about like how you came up with that?
Sure. I love metaphors, and I find in my coaching work, giving people an opportunity to kind of build a picture in their minds of what's going on or what they're moving toward can sometimes be really helpful. So,
Mm,
elastic initially came out of that, and the metaphor, not surprisingly, is one of a rubber band. And a rubber band, if it just sits on your desk and you don't use it for months,
mm,
I had this happen. So this is where this came from. It was sitting there for ages. And I went to pick it up and stretch it to show somebody something on camera like this, and it just crumbled in my hand. And we got talking about how if something or someone in this case isn't being used for the purpose for which it was intended, it can get really brittle and be unable then to serve that purpose. But similarly, if you think of stretching an elastic, sometimes obviously if it stretches too far too fast, it just snaps.
mm,
And some of us have that happen occasionally when we're just, pulled very suddenly to the brink of something and just cannot cope. But I think more often what happens is that we're gradually stretched for a long period of time, maybe in multiple directions. And the cumulative pressures of that become too much, such that either we snap or that elastic loses its stretchiness, right? We lose our ability to go back to shape or to serve another purpose in some way.
mm,
Or thinking maybe of, coming out of the pandemic a few years ago in particular, when people were being asked to go back, to snap back into shapes,
mm,
into routines, maybe into roles or jobs that just don't suit them anymore, that's where the metaphor kind of breaks down. By definition, a rubber band does go back into shape, but humans don't. And we may have outgrown old stories, old roles, old mindsets that once served us well, but no longer do. And so that metaphor really helps me think about the power of unlearning things and
mhm,
of finding our voice to be able to say, yes, that's true. I used to be that person. I have a sticker beside my desk that says that version of me is no longer in print. And helping people really discern who they are now was where that metaphor came from. Then the idea of elastic then evolved also into an acronym of the 7 letters of that word, which we can certainly talk about if you want. But
yeah, I'd love
there,
to.
there are leadership qualities that I notice in the leaders that I love to work with that are a little bit underplayed, undervalued. So, for example, the E stands for energy. And I noticed in my own work that energy is kind of the currency that I'm actually dealing in. People hire me to be re-energized. I also think that noticing energy in other people that might be dropping is a good proxy for how they're doing. And I think really excellent leaders infuse other people with energy. So there's a chunk of work on that. The L stands for likability. That's a whole other topic that we can get into that I really resisted in the book. The idea of particularly women, paying attention to to how they are seen by others makes me quite uncomfortable. And yet, leaders are people who have followers. They are people who persuade other people to imitate what they're doing or follow what they're saying. And when we look into the research on influence and persuasion, likability is really important. And
Mhm.
so talk about that. And then the A in Elastic is adaptability. I'm one of the early global coaches in a tool called the Adaptability Quotient that helps individuals and teams figure out their preferred pathway to adaptability and what tools to use that are going to get them there in a way that energizes them. The S is strategy. I mentioned that my main day job is strategic planning. And so helping people think strategically down a long road, multi-year, high altitude thinking that can connect that big picture with day-to-day work is important. The T is for trust, often mentioned but not unpacked in terms of how it is that we can build or rebuild trust quickly, because it's a really important currency, particularly on teams, but in any relationship. And then the I is imagination and the C is curiosity. And those are really the places that I spend most of my coaching time,
Mm.
is helping people nurture those skills, because I see all seven of those things as skills that we can get better at. And when we do, they allow us to be kind of stretchier people who are willing to stretch into new areas, but not in a way that's going to be unhealthy for us or take us back in old ways that aren't suiting us anymore.
That there's so much there. So thank you for breaking that down. I love how you shared about the rubber band. I actually was talking to my daughter. My daughter's a lot in this conversation a lot. Talking to my daughter the other night, she said, "Mom, are the rubber bands, or do you still have the rubber bands in your office?" And I said, "No, because they were in there for so long unused that they fell apart." And to your point, that if we're not using things that it falls apart, or we forget how to use them. And you broke down the elastic method into the acronym that you created. And there's a few things that I want to talk to, but I want to talk about the imagination piece, because I know the important, like as we get older, I know for me, I'll talk about me and some things that I see in my clients. As we get older, we get into the day-to-day responsibilities and the rigor of daily life, and the ups and downs of the goods and the things happening and the transitions we're going through. And one thing about being a mom, and I know you're a mom too, that I get reminded of when I see little ones is their imagination. And sometimes as adults, we can kind of forget that piece. That, and you said the I is for imagination and the C is for creativity. And I think that's such an important part of moving through anything that we're going through and having those two pieces. But as adults, we can kind of forget about those for many of us. So why do adults need to embrace imagination for and creativity for personal growth? Why is that so important?
I love that you link this with kids, because I think that's part of it. I think that imagination is often thought of as something that belongs to our childhoods
Mm.
and that we grow out of it. And I'm on a bit of a crusade to help adults grow into imagination rather than growing out of it. And I think it's really important and really possible. I think the importance comes from the fact that often, especially when we're going through transition, um, we can move towards something much more easily when we can picture it in vivid detail. And that's an imaginative task first. We have to create something in our minds before we can actually take steps to create it in real life or to move toward it in real life. And if we can't picture what that next chapter looks like, or we can picture it really vaguely, but kind of like a pencil sketch on a napkin or something, what does it look like for us to actually add color and shading and shadow and detail to that picture? When we start making that picture more vivid, we are much more likely to move toward it.
Mm.
So that's why I think it's very important for us to embrace imagination. But also for adults, imagination is actually more accessible to us than it would be to kids. And that seems counterintuitive, but it's because both our curiosity and our imagination are rooted in our memories. It's like our new
Mm.
ideas are springboards from our old ideas, from things we've experienced, things we've seen. So the more miles under the hood that we have, and the more experiences that we've gathered as adults, the more fodder we have to jump us into imaginative territory. So, for example, if you have never thought of traveling to Italy because you've never even heard of Italy, you're not going to be curious about it. You're not going to imagine your trip to Italy. It just isn't even in your head because you've never even heard of it. It doesn't occur to you. But as soon as you have an exposure of some kind, maybe it's even through a book, if not through traveling there, you go, that'd be interesting. And all of a sudden you can daydream your way into what it might feel like to meander the back alleys of some lovely Italian city. You're kind of off at that point and able to follow some other additional trails. And so the fact that as adults we have lots of experience to draw on makes it quite possible for us, if we can shed some of the bad rap that imagination has.
Mm.
um, I think that we can begin to let our creativity, our curiosity, our possibility thinking emerge. And when we're going into a transitional phase, particularly, but not only transitions that were involuntary, we can really resist picturing what the next chapter looks like because we are mourning and grieving the loss of the one that's just ended. And so
Mm.
gradually over time, as we can paint that picture in our minds of a new possible future, or ideally multiple possible futures, plural, our imagination is a really underused but important tool in our toolkit, I think.
Mm. Yeah, and I want to correct what I said earlier because I realized that you said C is curiosity and I said creativity because I think I was tying it to the imagination piece.
Yeah,
So
fair.
that is even more powerful that the C is curiosity because I think too where as we grow and like become adults and all the day to day and like you said you're like wanting you're helping adults lean more into imagination, keep the imagination or grow the imagination versus lose it, which I think happens to way too many of us. Same thing with curiosity. We lose curiosity too. We're like, okay, we're in our zone. This is what we know. This is what's getting us our paycheck or what we where we need to be. And then until something happens, then that will drive us to either take that next step or grow or get out of our comfort zone. So why is it, do you believe, with all that you've learned and all the research you've done and how you've helped people, where do you find that we lose that imagination or curiosity during our lifetime? And how can we, for those that are not there yet, maybe, how can they not let that happen, for lack of a better way of asking you that
Yeah,
question?
fair. Let's take it in a really practical way. I think one way we can stay curious, but also one way that makes us resist it or lose it is as we get older, you mentioned this, we get good at stuff, right?
Mm,
And we get in our lane, we get in our job, we get our expertise known in a particular field, and we lose touch with what it feels like to be a beginner, to be a rookie at something, to not be good at something. And we tend to land only in places where we are relatively competent, maybe even better than relatively competent. And so, therefore, when we go to learn something new, I mean, everybody's terrible at whatever you're brand new at, right? And if we haven't actually had that experience recently, it feels doubly uncomfortable. When you're 5 years old, everything you're trying, you're terrible at the beginning, and you don't have this expectation of being good at it. And so we're willing to just dabble and try stuff in a way that, as we get older, becomes much more uncomfortable for us. We're much more into caring what people think. We like our brains really like the security of certainty and of excelling at something. And so I think one really practical way that we can maintain curiosity throughout our lives, no matter how old we are, is by putting ourselves in situations where we are forced to learn and forced to be a rookie, be a beginner, be not good at something. I remember a mentor that I had in university. She had 4 kids like I have now, and she said we try to have our kids in situations where they are kind of top of the class, where they are middle of the pack, and when they are really terrible at something, because it's very good for people to have that experience of being in all of those places in a group. And that had never occurred to me, but here I am, probably almost 40 years later, remembering that conversation and saying, yeah, I think as adults we gravitate to safe places. And it's not that we are less curious actually than kids. We
mm,
are more focused in that curiosity. So, for example, we know how to do a Google search of something we're interested in, whereas a little kid might be kind of like all over the place trying to explore something. We have much more targeted curiosity, and we may have lost that exploratory nature, not because we aren't interested, but also, as you said, we get busy. And so we have responsibilities and we don't, sometimes certain kinds of curiosity takes time and mind space that as adults our schedules really fight against. And so again, it's not that we aren't interested in things or don't know how to be curious, but in a lot of us, it's a muscle that we just have not exercised in a really long time.
yeah, and as you were speaking, you just said it, and I actually was going to ask you the question around it. Like a lot of it could be time constraints. We're especially in the way the culture of the world is right now. We're go, go, go. We're so accessible. Our phones are on us. Many of us have three types of technology or digital products with us at all times. We could have our laptop, our phone, and our iPad, whatever that looks like, right? For some people. And that can lead to less time to even spend time being curious. So you had mentioned, and this leads me into your book. You had mentioned earlier that the L was for likability, and this was a very resistant piece in your book. And when you were sharing that, I thought of Brene Brown when she did her TEDx talk around vulnerability. And then after the fact, when I was reading her book, she said that she had so people, her publisher or her publicist and her husband were like, do not look at the comments. And then she looked at the comments and literally she was vulnerable to all of the negative comments that she had. And she literally spent her day like under the covers watching TV in order to move through that and then finally that gave her the grit to go, you know what? I am who I am. And it propelled her forward even, stronger. So what was it that was can you tell us about your book, first of all? And, what prompted you to write it? And two, what was it that you were so resistant around the L piece of it, the likability piece inside of your book?
The book did come out of the combination of being intrigued by the metaphor. I do a lot of workshops, and that's where my books start. This is my third book, and the books tend to start out loud in conversation with people. And I can imagine speaking and chatting and workshopping ideas. And then over time, as I do that, the ideas crystallize into the book. And that was true for each of the elements of the acronym we talked about. The book also has a more extended treatment of that metaphor. And then the third section is a series of case studies of organizations and their leaders that have really exhibited some of those qualities in my practice. It was a way of celebrating 25 years in business for me. And it was also a way to highlight some of the more sort of local-ish organizations. And I say that as a Canadian, I mentioned I'm in Canada, but also as someone who works primarily in mission-driven organizations that are often not featured in leadership literature. I found that when I run a no reading required book club for leaders once a month. And so I read a lot of books in that space. And I find that the corporate examples that are used are almost always the same ones. There's just this few large American, multinational types of organizations. You're reading about the same corporations all the time. And what I wanted to do was feature a wider range of leaders and organizations that are demonstrating some of those qualities. You asked specifically about likability, and I mentioned the reason it came up was that when I looked at what makes for a persuasive, influential leader across a really large variety of characteristics, likability bubbles to the top every time. And so I was resisting it because I didn't actually want that to be true. I think about, you mentioned your daughter. I have 3 daughters. Would I want to teach my daughters that, they need to be likable? I wouldn't actually. It would not be that sort of reputation management and over caring what other people think of you is not,
Yeah.
where I want to start with them. So I resisted it. And I also resisted it because we tend to like people who are like us. And so it's an area where a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion can actually be under threat because it can lead to kind of an old boys network kind of way of being in the world, which I'm not a fan of. So
Right.
that combination made me resist it. And interestingly, in more recent months, well after the book was released last year, I've been reading some work captured in a book called Likeable Badass. And there's another book called The Likability Trap that speaks against likability for some of the reasons I've talked about. It's also a very gendered concept. And so people can get it confused with niceness in women.
Mm.
But this new Likeable Badass piece of work talks about the fact that our status, meaning what people think of us, how much we are respected, how much what we say is listened to, is actually a pathway to power. And that's true for women as well as it is for men. And therefore, paying attention to how we are perceived is important in terms of securing access to resources and power of other kinds in organizations. And so I've continued my work in that space a bit, but I think what's really important about the likability piece is that there's a baseline level of integrity and competence. We don't tend to like people long term who are terrible at their jobs, for example, who lack integrity. So there's this sense of, a baseline of be a decent human, but then also be what I call someone who's outward oriented, meaning you're caring, right? So you've got this element of competence and caring that combine. And so even though what people specifically think of as competent or how they experience being well cared for, that's variable. But this idea of having somebody who's kind of a trustworthy, solid human, good at their stuff, and also who cares about you, there's something about that that is a real superpower in leadership and actually overlaps with some of the other work, say in trust or other some of the other areas. So I'm starting to make peace with it a bit, but it's as I said, as a mom, it's not where I would lead in terms of the first quality I would want to see my girls develop.
No, I thank you for diving into that because I agree. When you were talking, I was like, okay, does this tie into integrity and being a good human? Because not 100% of the people are going to like us, and
Sure.
we're not going to like 100% of the people. And like you said, we tend to like people who are like us. But at the end of the day, we can like people who are like us, but if they're out of integrity or they're not good humans, that's going to change. And just because somebody's not like us doesn't mean they're not a good person and they're not living in integrity and they're not trustworthy, right? And thank you for clarifying that and bringing that onto it and for being open about your challenge with the book and where you were, what was what that challenge was for you when you were writing it and that piece. So thank you for sharing that. I'd like to dive into your journey. So what was it about your journey? Because I know a little bit because I read from what you shared with me. But I want to share with the audience, like, what was it that brought you to where you are with your journey? I read a little bit about some sabbatical you took with your family that really opened the doors for, for where stepping into where you are now. Can you share more about that with us?
True. I think where I'd start is to say that sometimes a story, when you experience it from the inside, doesn't sound the same as from the outside. So from the outside, people might look at my work and say, yep, she's been doing, she's had her own business for the last 27 years. That is true. But from the inside, there's kind of chapters to it. And about every 4 or 5 years, I'm rethinking it and, kind of tweaking it and reorienting the focus. And so about 7 years ago, we were on the brink of going on a sabbatical as a family, which we did. And just before I left, I was given a book that I devoured very quickly because I didn't want to travel with a hard copy book in my suitcase. So I read it really quickly and all of a sudden went, oh, I think this might be describing what I would like the next season of my work to look like. Because at that time, 7 years ago, my oldest would have been 21. Our youngest was 13. So heading into high school, he was, and I was kind of like, should I be hiring more people? Should I be getting hired by a larger company? Is what I'm doing, the way I want to be doing it? How do I want to grow this?
Mhm.
So what the book was something put out by something called Thought Leaders Business School in Australia. And it happened that we were going to Australia as part of our sabbatical. I'd never been there before. And so my only official work day on the trip was to meet with somebody who'd been part of the writing team of that book. And I think what it did for me in that moment was kind of map out a path for the next chapter of my work. And, telling the story in hindsight feels different than living it in real time forward looking. But what ended up happening was I joined that program as a student, flew back to Australia later that year. And that was interesting because, any busy parents that are listening to this will know how hard it is and maybe weird it is to, extricate yourself from your busy household and hop on a plane, basically having bought training on the internet and flying to Australia from Canada. I thought I would be kind of demanding, right? Like, do you know how hard this was? And this is a pretty big deal for me. It wasn't like that at all. I was completely delighted. It was like I was a sponge. It was so exciting, really fun. And I plugged into being a student in this program, which was designed to help solopreneurs scale up their business.
Mm.
And I read the book and thought, yeah, that'd be great if that happened to me. Well, fast forward 7 years, it is what happened to me. I was a student in their program for about 3.5 years, and then I've been on faculty with them for the most recent 3.5.
Wow.
And my business completely took off as a result of that. And I think what I would attribute that to, in addition to the fact that it's a good program, is that it gave me some structure, first of all, to a pathway that I knew was kind of possible, but wasn't sure how to get there. But I
Mhm.
think even more importantly, and this ties in with the imagination piece actually, is I met people who showed me what was possible. And I think it's very important for us to be inspired by the company we keep. And sometimes imagination doesn't mean, often it doesn't mean rainbows and unicorns. Sometimes it means could I imagine myself doing what that person is doing or something similar to it, right? So having inspiring role models around us can spur some imagination that doesn't take us off into, some other planet, but it at least expands the possibilities in us to go, could I do or be or try that? And that's what this exposure to a group of really interesting, varied, ambitious people did through thought leaders. And so, the net of that was that I basically quintupled my business. I grew my network in massive ways. And I think it also showed my kids that that was an important piece of my journey because in the 20 years before that, I really willingly had been really involved in not just in raising them. I mean, my husband was too, but in my parenting journey being kind of the main piece of my story. And that next chapter allowed something else to come alongside that that was also meaningful and figuring out how to mesh all of that and find something else that I found really stimulating was helpful because during that same time, we were kind of beginning that empty nest journey,
Mhm.
emptying nest. I feel like I should write, that should be the next book is the gradually
I love
emptying.
that. Yeah. I could
Um,
use it for sure.
well, and at least your kids are close together in age, so hopefully your emptying phase will be shorter than mine.
Yeah.
But I think that I remember saying to my husband early on in those years, I will be okay once they're all gone. I think it's the gradual pull the band-aid off slowly thing that I found really difficult of having some of the family around and some not. I'm much more used to it now. But
Mhm.
I think at that time, having something that again, I could get excited about and a goal I could work toward was really helpful when some other parts of my life were feeling more like loss.
Wow. Wow, that's incredible. I love that you bring your kids into it and they get to see so much and you're open about it. And yes, if you do write the Emptying Nest book, please let me know because I want to buy it because as I shared with you behind the scenes, my son is 14, my daughter's 15, she'll be 16 in 3 months. And she's a sophomore in high school. She's got a couple more years, and then my son has 4, and they could be with me a little longer. Who knows what their journey is going to show up? But I have to plan ahead for that. And I think there's so much talk around empty nest, but I don't know of any talk around leading up to it. And I know for me, I have a lot of anxiety. I mean, it's not debilitating anxiety. I just know it's coming. And I'm sure as it gets closer, it's going to be I'm going to get more anxious around it. So if you have any insight and going to share it in a book, I'm more than happy to like purchase like 10 of them, 20 of them, 50 of them and share them with all of my people and bring you back on to share that. So for sure. So thank you for sharing that behind the scenes journey of yours. And it's just testament that no matter where we are, be open to the pivot, be open to the evolution. And it doesn't necessarily mean a pivot doesn't mean a huge pivot. It just means we're evolving. And as humans, our goal on earth is to learn and grow. I mean, that's the reason we're here, right? To learn and grow and evolve. And part of that is learning the lessons and being open to it and using our imagination, being open to the possibilities and imagining what's possible, right? For us and what's possible for someone else and what their journey is their journey. Don't compare yourself to someone else's journey, but can you imagine yourself doing something like that or similar? And getting curious about it and always having that curiosity. And you did that. Like you literally were curious, you were open, you're an imaginative, and you allowed that evolution to happen for you in the past 7 years, which and it all starts with something, right? For years it was a book. Right. Right. And then for everybody, it's different. So regarding, we talked about when it comes to, reinventing, you help people transition, like your book says, you're the midlife transition coach. So when it comes to helping high achieving women, this podcast is geared mostly toward women. Some men listen to it, but if we're talking about women or high achieving people in general, or, executives, who struggle to reinvent themselves. Why do high achieving executives, women, people struggle with this reinventing themselves during midlife? Why is midlife such a big transition for some of us? Like, why do we feel like, oh my gosh, is it because we're looking at our life going, oh my gosh, how much time do I have left? Like, what is that?
Part of it. I mean, it could be that the math of it is starting to feel a little daunting and we feel like we don't have that many turns left. And so I think part of it is extending our time frame and realizing that for those of us living in situations of privilege, we might have a 100-year life, not a 65-year life, right? So realizing that we have time and an opportunity to explore a number of things can be very helpful. I think also there's a bit of a cliche around it. I know part of my experience that made that phase hard for me was it seemed a little bit boring to talk about. Like lots of people go through this. This isn't that interesting. And yet it was kind of all consuming for me. And I think I had an image of people who struggled with this as being people who, maybe who devoted their entire existence to their kids and then their kids leave and they have no reason for being anymore. It was kind of a caricature in my mind.
Mm.
And that wasn't my life. I was devoted to my children, but I was also working for pay in a very successful situation. And I had lots of hobbies and lots of friends and was volunteering. And I had a really diverse, rich, interesting life. And yet, this was still a challenge. And so I think sometimes we can get blindsided by things because I often think that knowing about something is not the same thing as going through it, right? So you can
Mhm.
hear about something and go, yeah, that kind of makes sense and I'll be fine. But then when you get in the middle of it and you're feeling the emotions, it can still throw us off course. And I think particularly for people who've been in real leadership positions of various kinds, we're also used to moving through things pretty quickly. Like I'm somebody who I learn fast, I speak fast, I kind of move through life pretty quickly. And so I think the time frames of some of these things caught me off guard as well. And I do find that with some of my clients. They're used to mastering the material and, give me the exam and give me the gold star at the end. And sometimes some of these major transitions, and it doesn't have to be empty nest, it could be a job change, it could be the loss of a parent, the loss of a significant relationship. There's a gentleman named Bruce Feiler he writes a book called Life is in the Transitions. And his research in the US would suggest that these major, what he calls life quakes, take up about half of our adult life and average 5 years long each. So if that's true, part of what I can do as a coach is kind of set people's expectations a little more realistically about how long it might take us to feel a little bit more ourselves coming through some of these major transitions. And so that's another piece of it is I think that the pace of it and the maybe the layering of multiple of these on top of each other
Mhm.
can sometimes catch people off guard. And they're used to being people who, as I said before, are experts, are competent at things, are seeking out situations where they feel like they kind of got a handle on it. And by definition, big changes put us right in the soup of in-betweenness, and our brains really hate that level of uncertainty. So we try really hard to like anchor ourselves to something, and often what used to serve us isn't available anymore to anchor ourselves to, but that new next thing is still foggy. And so it's a foggy time. People describe it that way. They often talk about brain fog. They talk about feeling like they're flailing a bit, that they just don't have the scaffolding in place. And so part of what I can help people with is putting a little bit of structure and language to that and keeping them company during that transition because often it's pretty unfamiliar territory, particularly at an emotional level. Not just, oh, my calendar is more empty than it used to be or something, but emotionally it brings up some things that people are often pretty surprised by.
Yeah, you mentioned we're pretty busy people as humans, especially in today's culture and with what the advancement of technology, and it's not slowing down. It's only getting busier. And like I had mentioned earlier, we're more accessible. So I like that you shared, like sometimes things just hit us. We're not expecting it. And we may have heard about it, but until it happens to us, it really doesn't matter to us, right? We can kind of push that off and go, well, that's not going to be me until you slam against it. Like for me, it was overwhelm or burnout actually years ago. It just came upon me. There was no warning. It slammed into me. And though that's also part of sometimes we get what we need, not necessarily what we want, and things happening for us, not to us, not the way we always want it. I didn't want burnout, but it led me to where I am now. And just like the transitions you went through, it led you to where you are now. Can you share with us your book and or in your books and where we can find them, and also how we can connect with you?
Sure. Thanks for asking. The easiest way is just to go to my website, which is the same as my name. So it's RebeccaSutherns.com, and Sutherns is Sutherns. If listeners go to RebeccaSutherns.com/podcast, a couple things will happen at that page. One is that they can download a free copy of the Elastic Book. I've written other books prior to that, but that's the most recent one and most relevant to this conversation. They also will find a little quiz there. It's called a True for You quiz. And one of the things I notice is that when people are in transition, they sometimes feel like they've lost their anchor points, but they don't really know what the matter is. Sometimes that's how transitions start,
Mhm.
where it's like, I just have this niggling sense that something's not quite right, but we don't know how to name it. And so this little quiz helps us put some words to go, are you craving this or craving that? Would this help or would that help? It's just a quick way of kind of identifying a snapshot of where you're at right now and maybe what would help. So for some people, they're needing more contribution, they're needing more meaning and purpose. Other people need more challenge. They've kind of stuck with stuff they're good at and they need some learning and some adventure. Other people need space. They're just going and they don't have the mind space for, what else. Some people need connection where they go, I'm actually lonely. That's what I think this is. And that relational currency, that's part of that likability stuff we talked about earlier, is the investing in relationships.
Mhm.
Sometimes we only build relationships through our job or through our kids. And then when something like that changes, we go, oh, who are my people, right? And then the last area of that is clarity, where we're just like mentioning that we're in that midst of that fog and we need insight. And so they can go to that RebeccaSutherns.com/podcast and they'll find a link to that. And, they can follow the various internet rabbit trails that way to find the other things that I'm working on.
So definitely go check her out and go connect with her. Go to her website and go grab that her gift for you by going to RebeccaSutherns.com/podcast. I think it's amazing to give you a lot of clarity on where you're at right now and how you can take the next steps, and reach out to Dr. Rebecca and see how she can help you, and make sure you go grab her books. We're going to put all of her links inside of the show notes as well. So if you want to go into the show notes, you can easily go find her everywhere and all the things there. Dr. Rebecca, I just want to say thank you. I'm so grateful for your time. This has been such an empowering conversation, very enlightening for me as I am moving toward I'm in the nesting, what is it? The empty nesting. I'm getting ready for that. I've got probably 6 years on my calendar. No, not even. 4 years with my son because he's moving into freshman year next year. That's if he goes straight to college. So I'm starting to think about all those things, and you've definitely opened my mind into what those are. And now also I get to be more imaginative. I get to be more curious in what's out there and what's possible. So thank you for all of your insight. I do have two more questions for you. These are little fun. Before I get into the fun, like the little behind the scenes of Dr. Southern's questions, is there anything else that you want to share with us, any insights, tips, or anything that I didn't ask you that you want to make sure that you share with the audience?
I appreciate that opportunity. And I would just encourage people to stay curious. Sometimes when we're older, we jump to conclusions quickly. We think we know what we think. And I just got some new stickers recently that say stay curious longer.
Mm.
So I would encourage people to live in the uncertainty of that. It can feel pretty uncomfortable, but the longer we stay there, it's like a cold plunge. The longer that you try it, the longer you can actually last there. And so if curiosity or imagination feel uncomfortable for you, it doesn't make it the wrong choice. It just makes it unfamiliar. So stay curious longer.
You brought up something in my head when you said the cold plunge. Immediately thought shock, the shock of the coldness. And you said the longer you stay there, the longer you really surprise yourself on what you're capable of. Get through the shock. Don't let the shock stop you. Let the shock invigorate you to see what's possible. So that was awesome, amazing. I just my mind is there's so much opening for me. So thank you for this. So two questions I have for you is there a fun fact, a little something about Dr. Rebecca that we wouldn't know from just reading your books or seeing you on your website or listening to you on podcasts or seeing you on social media? Is there something behind the scenes about that we would be kind of surprised about that you'd
Well,
like to share?
if ever I play one of those party games where you say that, is there something that, you match this fun fact with the person? Most people don't realize that I am a big sports fan. They don't necessarily see that coming. So I'm actually a big knitter. So my sports fandom has more to do with the fact that I like to watch television while I knit things. And so I watch a lot of sports. So that's one area that not everybody sees. But I think even sort of a more kind of quirky thing is that before I started my business, so before I had my kids, I used to do a lot of travel in Africa, and I once shared uh, a sleeping quarters with a man's three wives and two cows. So, there's not very many people that have slept with three other women and two cows. So, if you look way back, there's some things, but that's been a while since I've been sleeping with cows.
Three lives and two cows.
You never know.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I'm actually intrigued about the knitting as well. That's really intriguing for me because I don't know how to knit. And so, what's your favorite sport to watch?
Well, I do live near Toronto, so I'm a big Toronto sports fan person. So during baseball season, we are Toronto Blue Jays fans. But at this time of year, we don't have an NFL team near where we live. But I'm certainly happy to be watching football, watching baseball, and Toronto Raptors basketball. But ultimately for me, it's a yeah. I just like to multitask probably, and it's more about working on whatever project I'm creating at that time.
That's so fun. Thank you for sharing that little insight into Dr. Rebecca. My last question for you is if you could have lunch with anyone, famous, politician, historical figure, whether they're alive or deceased, who would that be and why?
Yeah, so many choices. I think it's got to be Michelle Obama. And the reason I say that is because I'm intrigued by, I mean, I love spending time with smart women. That's who I love that. But you've been asking some behind the scenes kind of questions, and I really admire how she uses her influence and uses her time. But there's also a bunch of behind the scenes questions that I'd be curious about in terms of what her life has been like. And so she was the first person to pop to mind. I probably will get off this call and wish that I had said 13 other things, but
There's so
she's
many,
the
I'm
first
sure.
person that jumped to mind because my girlfriends and I often say that if we could include anybody else in our book club, who would it be? And her name comes up a lot.
I would love to. I'm with you. I think that that's amazing choice, amazing person, incredible. She would definitely be one interesting person to talk to. And yeah, the behind the scenes stories that she has, I can only imagine. They're probably super intriguing. So thank you for sharing. And your first choice is always your best choice. Sometimes we overthink things, and we like this is a perfect time to talk about, like, not talk about, we're not going deep because I want to be cognizant of your time, but just for you listening, like, don't overthink things. Go with your first choice, like Dr. Rebecca just did. Like, it's not the wrong, so we can overthink things. Am I right? Am I wrong? No, it's perfect. And lean into that. And of course, there's always many more choices. I have like seven, like, same with you. We have a ton of choices we could go to, but if there's one, who is that person, and go with the first person. So, and that's the taking action and things like that. If you have something that's on your heart, a calling on your heart, take action with it, go with what comes into your mind. The first thing, take action. It's always going to bring you in the direction that you want to go. I know that's a little side note, but I wanted to get that in because you, by mentioning that, Dr. Rebecca, brought that to my head, and I wanted to make sure that we shared that. So thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. This has been such an eye-opening conversation for me. So much great information. And I just want to say I'm grateful for you and your time, and wishing you and your loved ones, as we're recording this is the holiday season. So I'm wishing you and your family and loved ones a very happy holidays.
I appreciate the opportunity, Heidi. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dr. Rebecca. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you on the next episode of the Be She podcast. In the meantime, be empowered to be seen and heard.